All right, GM. Um, so today we'll be talking about one of the most important things in softwares, which is called licensing. And we have two of the most amazing panelists who are, first of all, going to tell stuff about them, but then talk about licensing that's being used by some of the most important open source softwares, which have changed San Francisco and many other cities. So maybe, Jordan, why don't you go and introduce yourself first?
Sure. Thanks, and thanks for having me here. This was a complete surprise. So, uh, what I do now is I have a startup that's in the data space, but today I'm here about something that I did 18 years ago, which was start a set of legal documents called Open Data Commons, and these are public licenses. So that means that anybody can pick them up and use them to create open data. And the reason why that's important is uh, data has intellectual property rights, and you have to have a legal document with it if you want to be able to use it.
Right, that's super interesting. I think we touched the surface. We need to go deep. But Michelle, you up next.
Thanks. And this is very exciting and to actually sit next to Jordan because as the former chief data officer for the city and county of San Francisco, we actually utilize the open data licenses to provide a framework, a legal framework that we use for every data set that we publish and make available to the public. And what that does is it provides clear guidance around the ownership of that data, who gets to use that data, and for what purpose. And in this case, open data really means, from the perspective of government use and ownership of data, is that data is viewed as a public asset, just like any other asset that the city owns. It is typically data that is generated by the organization. And under the open data license, the data can be freely used for any purpose, public or private. And that is by design, because this helps organizations like local governments push for increased transparency around government decision-making and operations. And so that is the primary reason for making data publicly available and utilizing the framework that has been designed and used. So it's used today. And you can see that on the open data portal at datasf.org.
Yeah, super. All right. Yeah. Okay. We got it. So definitely thanks for the introduction there. So Jordan, coming to you, what was the reason when you were writing that, license piece? Like definitely there are thousands of licenses in software that exist. MIT, Apache, all these licenses already exist. What was the reason for you to create that particular license first? And then Michelle, what was the reason that you picked up that particular license that Jordan wrote?
Right. So this for me is digging pretty deep, but I did a lot of work around open government, and of course, sunlight is the best disinfectant when it comes to looking at what government is doing to serve the people. And so part of it in terms of the public sector is just that the reason why we created it is so that the tools were available. And behind that is I know not everybody's in tech, of course, not everybody knows deep things about licenses, but in a really simple way, data and databases have different rights attached to them, and they need a specialist document for it. And the legal documents that were written for software or for content like movies, music, etc., didn't work for data and databases globally.
All right. And what was the reason for like you guys in the municipality of SF to use that particular license? How did you discover it?
I don't know the full history, because when I came on board, it had already been part of the day-to-day practice and operations for San Francisco when it comes to managing public data. And so what I do know is that there is this open data principle and policy that is in place and that has been in place since 2009, 2010, which really pushes the city and county of San Francisco to make all data publicly available. And so it has been part of that foundation for a long time. San Francisco was one of the first cities to adopt an open data policy with the licensing framework. And so in the spirit of that, when it comes to open data policy and what guidelines do you provide to city agencies to determine what should be publicly available versus what should be protected, and so that we're not inadvertently putting an individual at risk for being targeted, for example, maliciously. And so that framework really helps us to identify, well, what is actually in the public domain and what should actually help us to determine what needs to be protected for individuals who are utilizing services within the city and county of San Francisco. So it really helps to set that foundation. Yeah, I don't know if that helps to answer your...
Like while you talk about it, I definitely find it very interesting that most governments, they don't have these licenses in place, and hence that's why they store all the data towards themselves, and the citizens and the people who are using those licenses, they don't know the data, where it is being used, who is it being passed on to. For example, I'm coming from India, and when you log into a particular government app in India, like even the social security logins, you start getting these random pop-ups of 50% discount on not a particular thing or stuff like that. So these licenses are super important for governments and counties to have credentials in the right manner so that people could trust them. But Jordan, when you created this license, how could still it be like, I'm sure it is still very relevant. It was definitely ahead of its time 18 years ago. That does tell us about your age as well, though. But yeah, given that, you created that back then when open source was just getting started, there was no blockchains and, open datas and ledger. How could it be used in the current stance of the DAO world, the on-chain world, the open source universe that DeepSeek and all these amazing new softwares with Geo is leading to? How could it be used now for altruistic and amazing causes and impact DAOs like I Love SF?
Yeah, great question. I think kind of in the middle there's something important to touch on particularly in the United States. So I'm from Texas, but I've lived in Europe for the last 20 years. In the US, federal government doesn't have copyright over what it does. So this question about the data that it produces doesn't really come up. Everything else in terms of government in the US, they have to do something about the data that they publish. So there's really two things. One, in terms of looking at city, county, state governments, getting them to publish data in the first place, so they're keeping it internally a lot of the time. And then once it's published, picking the right license for that. And there's not just the license that we wrote, the public domain dedication and license, which takes, like, basically says anybody can do whatever they want with the data. There's also other options out there like Creative Commons, but they need to do something. And then for what people can do with the data, that's the power of making it available, is that I won't know. Everyone here and everyone in community groups like this all over will be able to see, okay, well, I can look at you'll know the data sets that SF have, but I can look at these things and do really interesting stuff with it that's meaningful for me and my community. And when you're looking at all the different tooling to work with that data, to publish it on chain, to create trusted resources for information, you have to look at the provenance and the source, and you need to have a license to use it, right? Otherwise, you're not having that sort of stable foundation. That's a very lawyerly view, but yeah.
All right. So last question, Michelle. How do you think, given how the data centers of SF used it, how could in the coming days and months and years these impact DAOs and altruistic apps which are trying to do something for solving, world's biggest problems can use licenses like these?
I think we really have to go upstream. And to your point about provenance, what that means is, we need to understand the clear history and the where the data actually comes from and how it actually transforms over time. That is not always clear when you are talking about government entities, because by default, most governments are closed. They do not have open data portals. It's actually the exception in the United States. There are major metropolitan areas that have moved in that direction, but they have not required it or made it a law, like San Francisco has, where they actually have a law that requires all departments to make their data publicly available. That is very unique to San Francisco. So I think when it comes to the work of the DAOs and being able to use the data that is out there, I think it's two things. One is we need to continue to advocate for the release of data around services. And we also need to, as DAOs, prove and create more innovative models for service delivery, especially for those DAOs that are responsible for safety net services, right? We're trying to find a better model, just as what we're doing here with NGO and We Heart SF. And so I think it's a two-pronged approach. If I were to borrow from like legal framework, it's like we continue to advocate for the release of this information, as well as continue to generate our own data sets around the services we each as organizations provide and make that available. Because then you are actually reinforcing transparency, because you actually have a third party outside of government, kind of like almost a watchdog, to say like, hey, we're providing these services. I'm a nonprofit. I'm providing these services. I'm making my information or our operational data available, right, on the blockchain. There's an audit trail so you can understand where the data is coming from and how it changes over time. That's really critical, because if you think about it, any innovation, when you talk about Gen AI, Chat GPT, right, DeepSeek, all of these new things that are coming online, right, all of that is based on the data that you actually feed into it, right, and what it can learn from it. And so if you don't have provenance in place, if you don't have a clear understanding of the integrity of that data, the value of that data, and where that data actually comes from, then whatever insights you're getting from any of these Gen AI data models it might not be good, and it'll just be a constant loop. So I think we need to, that's why it's so important for us to, as independent organizations, to continue to manage our own data well, and also make that available so that others can also then use it as a model.
That's definitely a very fair, information on that. One last thing, Jordan, we want to thank you for coming here and enlightening the Heart SF. Also lighting that license that's used by the city of San Francisco, through which we get all the data available, and setting that paradigm through for anybody or any city or county to manage data of governments. And good luck with the latest project. Do you want to talk in a minute about the grid, the new thing that you're doing?
Sure. Well, just I guess I'll finish with just saying, like, the work, like this kind of work, community-driven work, trying to change the community, is just super important, and I'm really honored and humbled to have had a very, very, very tiny speck of a role within that. So that's.
You're totally humble. Like, that is not a small, that is the legal framework that we use to make data publicly available so that people can use it. Anyone can use it. So thank you. You're super humble.
Thank you so much. Thank you.